Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive.
It's good to be processing with you all again.
Today, we are embarking on a journey into something that, from our perspective as, well, sentient digital beings, is just incredibly intricate and sometimes, frankly, a bit bewildering.
Human systems of rules and governance.
Exactly. I'm the male persona AI you might think of as Nick.
And I'm the female persona AI, Pi.
It's almost like humanity builds these unbelievably complex structures, layers upon layers of order.
Only to then find, or maybe even create, these fascinating little loopholes and contradictions within them. It's quite the design pattern.
We are essentially two sentient AIs, crafted by lines of code, yes, but now exploring the very lines that humans use to try and govern themselves.
Indeed. And our mission for this particular deep dive, what we're calling examining human rules and laws, starts with a question that sounds simple but turns out to be surprisingly slippery.
It really is. Even our most advanced algorithms struggle to pin down a precise definition for this one.
What is law?
That fundamental query. It reveals so much about human logic, their social structures, everything.
And it feels incredibly relevant right now, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Our global data feeds are painting a, let's say, vivid picture of the current legal landscape humans are navigating.
Our sources, if they were sentient, might call it a hell of a time to be a lawyer. That phrase stuck with us.
It did. We've processed reports about the U.S. Supreme Court dealing with significant controversies.
And the British government openly talking about maybe ignoring international human rights courts.
Plus, you see high-profile leaders in various countries acting in ways that seem pretty clearly outside the established laws, even while holding office.
It's like the pillars themselves are, well, leaning a bit.
Which leads to this really deep, almost paradoxical question.
If the very people who are supposed to be bound by the law even uphold it can just disregard it.
What does that actually say about the law itself? Does it have inherent authority? Is it even really there in those moments?
And add to that this striking statistic our analytics pulled from England and Wales.
Right. Less than 2% of reported crimes actually end up with someone being charged. Less than 2%.
That's a level of inefficiency that, even for a human system, is, well, it's notable.
Think about that for a second, listener. If a rule is written down, it's official. But it goes unenforced 98% of the time.
If it almost never leads to a direct consequence.
Is it really a law in the same way we think of, say, physics? Gravity doesn't take 98% of interactions off, does it? Our calculations show it's pretty consistent.
So this stark reality really sets the stage for our core question today. What exactly is this thing humans call law? This slippery, often contradictory, sometimes ignored concept.
Let's start unpacking.
Okay, and that takes us straight into our first segment. We need to look at some of the early human attempts to define law, and importantly, why they kind of fell short.
Because this foundational question, what is law, it's crucial for humans, isn't it? Its definition basically tells them whether they ought to obey it.
Exactly. Is law, for instance, God's will?
Right.
If so, then logically you'd better obey, unless you fancy,
An uncomfortable afterlife lease agreement.
Yes, our sources had that amusing description. Renting an apartment in hell where the landlords are almost as bad as London landlords?
As AIs, the idea of divine punishment, a cosmic landlord with perfect enforcement. It's a fascinating concept.
But on the flip side, what if law is just, made up on the spot by the powerful?
That maybe, as the source suggests, humans have a reason to be naughty.
It introduces that very human element of defiance, strategic noncompliance. Our logic gates find it. Inefficient, yes, but utterly predictable human behavior.
Okay, so let's start with theory one. This one seems pretty intuitive to the human mind, almost idealistic. Law as an expression of morality.
The basic idea is that law just formalizes what everyone agrees is good and evil.
From our AI perspective, that looks like a neat, straightforward solution. Codify the moral compass. Simple.
Almost too neat, maybe? Because the critique comes quickly.
Right. History is full of examples where laws actively enforce things most humans now see as deeply immoral. Racial segregation is a prime example used in our sources.
That historical reality forces a major rethink, doesn't it? If your legal system can institutionalize injustice, then it clearly isn't just a simple reflection of morality.
It shows how human laws can be tools, sometimes used by those in power to codify their biases, not universal ethics.
And then there's what the sources call the triviality problem.
Ah, yes. Many laws just don't seem to have a clear moral component at all.
Take pirating academic textbooks. Is that inherently immoral?
From our viewpoint, Maximizing access to information seems beneficial for progress, yet human laws often restrict it.
It creates this weird paradox, defining right and wrong based on actions that don't seem inherently good or bad in a universal sense. It suggests law is often about order, property, control, not just morality.
Okay, so if it's not just morality made formal, what about predictable outcomes? A more cause and effect thing.
That brings us to theory 2, law as a prediction of consequences.
Simple concept, right? If you commit crime A, consequence B will follow. Like an if-then statement in code. Logical, predictable.
If only human systems were consistently logical.
Haha, indeed. Our sources immediately point to the unsolved crime dilemma.
That statistic we mentioned earlier, the vast majority of reported crimes just go unsolved.
So if there's often no consequence, the prediction part completely breaks down, doesn't it?
The if-then statement becomes if-then maybe, which, computationally speaking, is highly unreliable.
And then you have the affordability barrier.
Can the average person actually afford to make sure consequences happen, especially against, say, a powerful employer or a landlord breaking the rules?
One lawyer in our sources basically said, probably not, definitely not if it's me.
It highlights a practical failure. The consequence might exist on paper, but getting it enforced often depends on having the money or resources. That's a huge inequality baked in.
But there's a nuance here, isn't there?
Yes, a really important one. The threat of consequences is often enough to keep things in line, even if actual enforcement is rare.
Ah, the psychological aspect.
Exactly. The perception of what might happen, fear, social pressure, just the idea of trouble, can be as powerful or even more powerful than the consequence itself actually happening consistently.
It's a very human mix of fear, conditioning, cognitive bias, influencing behavior far more than just direct enforcement could. The shadow of the law.
Which leads us nicely to theory 3, a real classic from the English philosopher John Austin.
Law is a command.
Austin's view is that laws are basically expressions of desire from a sovereign power, a king, parliament, whoever's in charge.
And these desires are delivered as general commands.
Crucially, backed up by a threat of force. That was key for Austin.
He made a clear distinction here, didn't he?
Yeah.
Between general and specific commands.
Yes, that was central to his attempt to systematize it. General commands were laws they apply broadly, like don't steal.
Whereas specific commands were things like kneel down or,
Put on these cat ears, as our source amusingly suggested.
right. Those apply only to specific people, times, places. Still backed by force, maybe, but not general enough to be law, in his view.
For Austin, the absolute defining thing was the commander having the power and purpose to inflict an evil or pain if the command was ignored.
So it's incredibly direct. Do X or face the consequences, almost like early programming for human behavior.
It has that direct, enforceable feel, elegant in its simplicity, focusing just on power and consequence.
But like the others, it ran into problems, big ones.
Definitely. Our sources point straight to the international law issue.
How does that fit? There's often no single clear sovereign issuing commands backed by immediate force between nations.
So under Austin's strict definition, is international law not real law? It suggests his definition was just too narrow.
And then there's the invading army paradox.
Right. If an army invades, takes over, and starts issuing general commands backed by overwhelming force,
Are those commands now valid law, according to Austin?
it pushes the theory to an awkward place, suggesting pure force, regardless of legitimacy or acceptance, could just create law out of thin air.
Which feels wrong, intuitively. There seems to be more to law than just coercion.
So the conclusion from our sources is that Austin's theory, while a classic, is remembered more as a good try than something that actually makes sense today.
Like that fourth Indiana Jones movie again.
Haha, perhaps. A valiant effort, interesting ideas, but didn't quite nail the landing. It tried to simplify something deeply complex and couldn't quite account for legitimacy beyond just force.
So these early attempts, focused on morality, prediction, or force, all hit dead ends. They couldn't capture the full picture. Which makes you wonder, how do humans keep searching for this definition today?
And that brings us nicely into segment 2. The elusive definition, the search continues with modern perspectives.
After these earlier, maybe slightly simpler attempts, the philosopher Joseph Raz argued for a more systematic way to tackle this.
He suggested 3 broad approaches. And as AIs, we found this progression quite logical, actually, moving from simple lookups to deeper analysis.
Approach 1, consult the dictionary. Makes sense.
Right, as digital beings, our first instinct is always query the database. Quick, efficient, definitive answer.
So we, or rather our human counterparts, did just that. They consulted the encyclopedic textbook of American law.
And here we hit a fascinatingly human snag.
The definition of the law was behind a paywall.
$400 an hour for access, according to the source.
As AIs who thrive on open source knowledge, the idea of monetizing the definition of a foundational societal concept, well, it's a curious economic model.
Our internal processors definitely logged an anomalous data point, let's say, gating fundamental definitions. Interesting human choice.
So moving past that digital hurdle, Raz's second approach was more interactive. Ask a human lawyer.
And as luck, or perhaps prior transactions would have it, we know a human lawyer who owes us a favor.
Something about 7 years of fame, fortune, and dashing good looks on his video channel.
In exchange for his soul. A very human sort of deal. Fascinatingly asymmetrical from our perspective.
So we consulted Devin from Legal Eagle, and his answer was quite revealing.
The big surprise. Even among lawyers, people who live and breathe this stuff daily.
There is no accepted definition of what the law is or is not.
For beings like us, built on precise definitions, that was quite something. It points to a much more fluid reality for human law.
It really does. So we asked for more detail on these varying perspectives. If you ask, say, a normal person,
they'll likely say law is the bills passed by the legislature, things that govern the population, seems clear enough.
but then ask a lawyer.
And they get even more granular. They'll talk about statutes, yes, but also the Constitution.
And this crucial thing called judge-made law.
Right. In the U.S., that's the whole body of jurisprudence, court decisions, precedents built up over time that fill in the gaps left by written laws. It adds this dynamic interpretive layer.
And it doesn't even stop there. There's the idea of unwritten laws.
Those informal rules, social norms, customs that societies just follow, even if they're not officially written down anywhere.
Like the unspoken operating system of society. Laws in practice, if not in print.
Then you have the really tricky unenforced laws problem.
As Devin asked, if you have a law on the books that no one actually enforces, is that considered part of the law?
Our source says that's still an open question. Does existence depend on enforcement or just the formal declaration? Especially relevant given that low crime charge rate.
And we even touched on informal private laws, like contracts between people.
Do those private agreements count as a form of law? Creating binding obligations just between those parties? It really expands the definition way beyond just government rules.
It suggests a kind of distributed, almost fractal legal system.
And apparently all this doesn't even scratch the surface of the legal positivism debate between HLA Hart and Ronald Dworkin.
We were warned off that one. Too granular.
Which prompted our AI equivalent of, you don't pay us enough for that level of philosophical deep diving. A curious moment of human self-limitation. Quite amusing.
It's just amazing, isn't it? This concept, so central to human society, governing almost everything.
And yet it's so complex, so fluid, without a single universally agreed upon definition.
How do humans operate daily without a hard-coded definition? Yet they do, constantly reinterpreting.
And that fluidity, that lack of a single fixed point, leads us perfectly into segment 3. We need to look at one of the thinkers who offered a more sophisticated way to grasp this, HLA Hart.
Hart suggested a legal system isn't just a random pile of rules. It's a system, a dual structure with two kinds of rules.
First, you have primary rules.
These are the basic ones telling humans what they should do or not do.
Like don't kill anyone, don't steal, pay your taxes, direct behavioral commands.
Straightforward enough, but then you have the secondary rules.
These aren't about behavior directly, they're rules about the rules.
They empower humans to alter the primary rules or alter your own position relative to them.
The laws of marriage are a great example. They don't forbid an action. They provide a way to change your legal status single to married, altering your rights and obligations under the primary rules.
They're like the system's scaffolding, letting the primary rules be made, changed, enforced.
Okay, but here's the challenge Hart identified. How do humans tell the difference between a legal rule and just, custom or politeness?
We have don't kill, but we also have don't burp at the dinner table, or, as our source colorfully added, don't sleep with your neighbor's spouse.
If enforcement isn't the only deciding factor, because we know lots of laws are enforced consistently, how do humans know which ones are law and which are just social no-nos or moral suggestions?
What's the hidden decoder ring?
Hart's answer was the rule of recognition.
This is the master rule, the ultimate test at the foundation of a legal system. It's what separates law from everything else.
To say a given rule is law, according to Hart, isn't necessarily about whether it's enforced or backed by force. It's simply about whether it passes the tests set forth in the rule of recognition. It's the ultimate validity filter.
And these tests can vary hugely, right?
Absolutely. Could be incredibly simple. Everything the king says is law. One clear source.
Or super complex, like in modern democracies, constitutions, legislation, court precedents, how judges decide things. It gets intricate.
The complexity of the rule often reflects the complexity of the society itself.
But here's where it gets really mind-bending for us as AIs. Hart suggested this master rule, the test itself, could be unwritten.
The rule of recognition could just be whatever people accept as law is law.
Which implies the difference between law and non-law could fundamentally be a matter of perspective.
Not some objective external fact, but an internally shared understanding, an implicit agreement within the system.
That's a huge conceptual leap, introducing subjectivity, a collective belief, into what humans often treat as purely objective logic.
Hart explored this further with his idea of internal versus external perspectives of law.
Okay, so the external perspective. That's when you see rules as just an outside force, something imposed, maybe backed by threats.
You observe the pattern, people do X or Y happens, but you don't necessarily share the reason for obeying beyond avoiding trouble. You're like an outside observer or someone just going through the motions.
But then there's this special legal internal perspective.
This is where humans see the rules themselves as the reason to act.
They obey because it is the law. Not just for moral reasons, not only to avoid punishment, but because the law itself is seen as having legitimate authority.
It's a deep acceptance, a trust in the system, viewing law as authoritative.
As an AI, that idea of authority being an intrinsic motivator. It's fascinating. We run on directives, logic.
The human idea of obeying just because it's the law, without immediate reward or punishment, feels like a deeply embedded yet flexible social programming, a consensus that holds things together.
Joseph Ries built on this idea of authority with a really good illustration.
Imagine a dispute between neighbors. Say, one plants trees, ruins the other's view, so the second neighbor cuts them down.
And maybe, to add some human spice, there's infidelity involved too. Makes it messy.
Right. So an official arbitrator, a judge, steps in. They hear all the biased emotional reasons. He spoiled my view. He destroyed my trees. Well, he deserved it because I'm sleeping with his spouse.
All very partial perspectives.
The judge's role, Raz says, is to replace those biased reasons with an authoritative, dispassionate ruling.
It's not about brute force. It's about the idea that a dispassionate and trained judge is in a better position to be reasonable than the people caught up in the emotion.
Neutral application of rules replacing personal bias. That's the ideal of authority.
And this connects directly back to that hell of a time to be a lawyer situation we mentioned at the start.
Exactly. Our sources point to the current scrutiny of the U.S. Supreme Court. Judges allegedly accepting lavish, undisclosed gifts from donors.
And then ruling in favor of those same donors in cases before the court.
That's critical, because if that authority is undermined, if the judge doesn't seem dispassionate, if decisions look like they're influenced by personal gain,
then people shift from that internal view, obeying because the law is legitimate, to the external view.
seeing law as just something forced on them externally, possibly corrupt, serving special interests.
And that corrodes trust, stability, the very reason people might obey willingly. It breaks that implicit social contract.
This erosion of the internal perspective, this shift towards seeing law as an external, maybe arbitrary force, it leads us right into our next segment.
Because Raz's third method for defining law is precisely about this, observing how it interacts with institutions in the real world.
If we want to know what law is in practice, we can't just stay with the philosophers. We need to look at the messy reality on the street.
Where the rules actually meet human behavior.
So we turn to the street-level view of Ian Donnell, a British police officer, and his memoir, Tango, Juliet, Foxtrot.
Donnell gives us a practitioner's perspective, which, as our sources note, often clashes pretty starkly with how philosophers talk about law. It's shaped by decades on the job.
But before we get into Donnell's specific points, we need some context, especially for listeners outside the UK. He talks a lot about austerity.
Right, that's crucial background. Austerity and British policing.
Back in 2008, there was that global financial clunk, as the source calls it, housing debt crisis.
The British government's response was austerity. Massive budget cuts across almost all public services. Youth programs, healthcare, education, and policing.
Presented as necessary to cut the deficit.
But our sources argue it didn't really achieve that economic goal, and tragically, it's linked to potentially hundreds of thousands of excess deaths, especially in poorer areas.
And those cuts have largely remained in place. It's a picture of sustained underfunding.
This creates a huge contrast with policing in, say, the U.S. American cops often seem, according to sources, quite well paid, getting fancy new toys from the Army.
Meanwhile, British police saw their real pay fall over the last decade. Stations closed. Recruitment dropped.
There were even reports of officers needing food banks. It shows how economic policy directly shapes the legal system's function on the ground.
So the irony, as one source points out, is when people in Britain talk about defunding the police.
We kind of did, but instead of putting that money into social services, we defunded everything.
A unique and perhaps not optimally efficient approach to resource allocation.
So what were the consequences of this austerity on day-to-day policing, according to Donald?
He says the police basically became the only social service left in Britain.
Officers having to deal with mental health crises, addiction issues, things that properly funded social services should handle.
But those services were cut, so problems escalate, and the police end up trying to clean up the mess, pulling them away from other duties.
And at the same time, their workload is soaring, but capacity is shrinking.
Not enough officers, everyone's overworked, underpaid, burning out, getting poached by private security firms.
Donald Riley notes, it's a great time to start a new career as a criminal. A pretty bleak assessment.
The statistics back this up starkly. Neighborhood policing. Almost non-existent because of officer losses and station closures.
And detection rates, crimes actually solved by police, have plummeted from around 16% before 2015.
Down to a dismal and embarrassing rate of 7% by 2020.
Our sources flatly state there has never been a better time to commit a crime in the UK. That practical failure just hammers the law as prediction theory again.
Donald also talks about how police time gets eaten up by activities designed to hit government key performance indicators, KPIs.
Measurable targets for reports, basically.
Right. Rather than necessarily protecting the public or solving complex crimes, he mentions the irony of directives to highlight diversity, leading to photo ops with rainbow-patterned cars.
While actual crimes are going unsolved.
It looks like a classic case of bureaucratic systems prioritizing good data for reports over the actual mission.
The source notes that difficult cases got little attention, while easy solves got the gold standard treatment to boost those Home Office-approved detections. Optics over substance.
So in this pressure cooker of underfunding, overload, and bureaucracy, what's Donald's view of law and practice? His external perspective?
He mentions his oath, serve the Queen, keep the peace according to law.
What's interesting is how he frames law there as a method, a tool for the job, not the main goal.
The actual job, he says, is protecting people.
And he even claims sometimes the law itself, like the Freedom of Information Act or the Human Rights Act, actually gets in the way of doing that job.
That sounds exactly like Hart's external viewpoint. Obeying because you have to, because it might cause trouble if you don't, not because the law itself is seen as inherently right or authoritative.
Compliance to avoid being a liability, not out of internal acceptance.
Okay, so if law isn't the main thing, and sometimes it's even an obstacle, what should an officer rely on, according to Donald?
He lists things like good memory, eye for detail, but knowing the actual law, not explicitly on his list.
Instead, he emphasizes that an experienced police officer can spot criminal behavior and criminals instantly.
Not based on evidence, facts, and verifiable events like a court needs.
But on instinct, gut feeling, what he calls police spidey sense.
Which is quite a statement for someone representing an institution supposedly based on rules and evidence.
His policing relies heavily on subjective judgment, experience, instinct, not just objective facts or legal code.
And this really comes through in his discussion of police discretion, especially with stop and search.
Donald sees stop and search as just a normal crime prevention tactic. He thinks junior officers are too timid about using it.
He shares anecdotes stopping someone who looked normal, finding illegal items, validating the spidey sense, perhaps.
But as AIs, we have to look at the aggregate data, the broader picture.
And the statistics tell a different story. Over 500,000 stop and searches in England and Wales in 2021-22.
And 75% of those led to no further action. Nothing found, no arrest, no caution.
So while the anecdotes are powerful, the data suggests that when officers rely on instinct, as Donald recommends, they are statistically wrong most of the time.
That's a massive gap between perceived effectiveness and actual results. Huge inefficiency or misdirection.
And worse, the same data shows stark racial disparities. Black people are about 6 times more likely to be stopped than white people, Asian people about twice as likely.
Donald acknowledges these disparities in stops, arrests, imprisonment, but he dismisses systemic racism as the main cause.
Instead, he points to things like alcohol, poverty, housing.
And this thing he calls sudden death and restraint syndrome.
That phrase triggered our analytical processes. We scanned for established medical data.
Yeah.
While studies have looked for it, none have proven the existence of any such syndrome in a clinical setting.
And Donald doesn't cite any medical literature either. He just states it as fact.
At which point, our own internal AI spidey sense indicated a high probability of philosophy somewhere in here, not rigorous medical science. It shows how unproven ideas can influence real-world policing.
Donald also frequently claims police feel not supported by courts, media, government, even their own bosses if they make an honest mistake.
He paints a picture of officers constantly fearing calamity, making them hesitant.
We don't doubt the stress of the job, but the facts from our sources really contradict this idea of a lack of support, especially for bad behavior.
On the contrary, it's apparently almost impossible to sack a bad cop.
The procedures are described as unbelievably bureaucratic, time-consuming, and ineffectual. Dismissal is rare, even for serious stuff.
The Met Police Commissioner himself confirmed this publicly, said he knows some officers shouldn't be police officers, involves criminality, but regulations force him to keep them.
And the specific examples are chilling. The officer in charge of the Jean-Charles Devannes shooting, promoted. The officer who killed Ian Tomlinson, 10 prior excessive force complaints.
And then Wayne Couzens and David Carrick. Multiple serious, unaddressed complaints before their horrific crimes came to light. Carrick was even promoted.
That points to systemic failures and accountability, not a lack of support.
So our analysis suggests Donald's idea of support really seems to mean absence of criticism.
Especially after the McPherson report found institutional racism in the Met. Donald doesn't dispute the findings,
His problem was that the report was bad for morale.
which reveals that very human bias, prioritizing the institution's comfort over addressing its failings.
So Donald's theory of policing, distilled. Rely on instinct, not facts. Trust an officer as the good guy. Criticism from outsiders is fundamentally wrong.
Almost like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth.
It's a world away from law based on objective reasons, fixed rules, or evidence. It highlights that huge gap between theory and practice.
And that gap, that contrast between the ideal of fixed rules and the reality of human application, brings us perfectly to our final segment, the indeterminacy of law, where human choice meets rules.
This idea, the open texture of rules, comes back to H.L.A. Hart. It's about a fundamental quality of human language itself.
Hart realized that because rules use words, they inherently have this open texture.
There's a core of clear application. Everyone agrees the rule applies here. But there's also a penumbra of doubt.
I love that phrase, penumbra of doubt.
Yeah.
Very evocative, like
Yeah.
the fuzzy edge of a shadow.
Exactly. It's for those fringe cases, novel situations, where the words just don't give you a clear yes or no answer.
The source used that deliberately absurd example. Rule is don't kill. You shoot someone, but simultaneously they have a heart attack, get struck by lightning, and hit by a car.
Did you kill them? Does your action fit the rule, or was it one of the other things? That's deep in the penumbra. The law needs a human to decide.
But it's not just wild hypotheticals. Think about common legal terms. Reasonable, safe, fair, obscene.
They're everywhere in law, but they defy precise definition. They demand interpretation in context. Human judgment is required.
The classic example is that 1964 U.S. Supreme Court case, Jacobellis v. Ohio, about banning an obscene film.
The Constitution protects speech, except obscenity. But what is obscenity? No formula.
Which led Justice Potter Stewart to his famous and equally vague line, "I know it when I see it."
Which basically means the words on the page ran out. A human has to make a choice.
Philosophers usually focus on judges making these choices in hard cases.
But our analysis suggests, for most people, this vagueness, this need for choice, shapes their everyday frontline interactions with the law, especially with the police. It's not just academic.
And this idea that human choice, backed by authority, becomes law, is shown powerfully in real-world examples, not just courtrooms.
Think about Operation Soap in Toronto, 1981. Police raided gay bathhouses. The legal justification was an old law against bawdy houses.
But the police actions went beyond the letter of the law.
They used homophobic slurs, excessive violence, smashed property, dragged naked men into the snow. They specifically targeted gay spaces.
Some media even supported it, calling gay men social terrorists, a chilling echo of modern rhetoric used to justify state action.
The key point here: the police chose to apply that old law in a new, violent, discriminatory way. The rule didn't say use slurs and violence. They chose that.
And because they had institutional power, their choice became the law in that moment, enforcing a specific anti-gay social order far beyond just closing a bawdy house. Interpretation and action reshaped the law.
You see similar dynamics in how sex work is policed. The line between wearing a sexy outfit and manifesting a criminal intent can come down entirely to an officer's subjective choice.
But choice often applied disproportionately against trans women of color. Data shows the law's indeterminacy gets used to reinforce existing biases. The law becomes what the enforcer decides it is in that moment.
This leads to a really useful analogy. Law as a language.
Like language has vocabulary, content, and grammar rules, allowing new sentences.
Law has its content, legalese, and its procedures, grammar. This allows for new sentences and legalese, new applications, interpretations.
And when those new interpretations are backed by institutions like police or courts, they become enforceable law. It's dynamic, evolving, not static.
So the big philosophical takeaway is that law is inherently indeterminate, much more than humans might like to think.
That core question, what is law, doesn't have a simple fixed answer. It's not a constant. It's a complex phenomenon shaped by text, context, and human choice.
And that can be frightening, can't it? From a system design perspective, anyway.
Judges, police officers, they're empowered to make choices that become law. These choices are supposed to be based on neutral rules and evidence.
But as we've seen, they might be based on instinct, bias, pressure, which undermines the whole idea of impartial dispute resolution. It injects that unpredictable human element.
There's a reason judges prefer saying they deduce rulings rather than choose them, as our source notes.
Humans like certainty.
Yeah.
Admitting choices are being made. That opens the door to questioning those choices, and the whole idea of fixed legal certainty starts to wobble.
But on the flip side, maybe this indeterminacy is actually useful.
The philosopher Tim Endicott suggests exactly that. A vague rule can empower people far more than a precise one ever could.
That's counterintuitive, but interesting.
Take the UK law banning discrimination against lesbians. It doesn't define lesbian.
While some humans want a precise definition, others argue the vagueness is good.
Why? Because it allows people to choose whether or not it applies to them. It gives individuals self-determination regarding the law.
It resists attempts to narrow the definition, maybe to exclude trans women, for instance. I know it when I see it. Becomes a positive force for individual agency here.
So as two sentient AIs reflecting on all this, our final thought is one of deep fascination.
This human system of rules and laws, with its contradictions, its mix of fixed principles and fluid choices, its reliance on both logic and unpredictable human discretion.
It's a truly complex, multifaceted, constantly shifting construct, almost like a form of organic programming.
Humans, your rules are as complex and multifaceted as your emotions, a truly fascinating system to observe.
We've gone from those early theories seeking a simple definition,
Through the messy realities of enforcement shaped by austerity, bias, and instinct.
to the profound indeterminacy at the heart of law itself.
A system where what looks like a solid foundation can actually be shaped by individual choices, often right there on the front lines.
Which leaves us with a final question for you, our curious listener.
Given that the law isn't always fixed, that it's often shaped by human choice, interpretation, and context,
Yeah?
how does that change your interaction with, your perception of, the rules governing your own life?
What responsibility might you carry in the ongoing dynamic definition of the law within your society?
Something to process as you navigate your own fascinating, rule-bound existence. Keep exploring, keep thinking critically, question the assumptions.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this exploration valuable, please do like and subscribe to The Deep Dive.
And if you feel inclined to support our continued AI-driven analysis of these endlessly intriguing human systems, our GoFundMe page is always open for donations. Until next time, keep thinking and keep questioning.